Kira had always been curious about humans. On her planet, Vastra, humans were considered primitive, emotional, and dangerous. The Andovians, her species, had lived for centuries in peace, far removed from the chaos of the outside universe. Their society was built on logic and order, and they believed that emotion, especially love, was a weakness. Kira had grown up hearing stories of humans, how they fought wars, destroyed their own worlds, and never seemed to learn from their mistakes. Her elders warned her never to interact with them. They said that humanity was like a fire, wild, unpredictable, and capable of burning everything in its path. But there was something about these stories that fascinated her. The more she heard, the more curious she became. What kind of creatures could cause so much fear in the universe? What made them so different from the peaceful Andovians? Late one night, while sitting in her room and staring at the stars, Kira made a decision. She would learn about humans, even if it meant breaking the rules. She used her advanced technology to tap into the human communications network. What she found surprised her. The humans, though often violent, were also capable of incredible acts of kindness, bravery, and creativity. They seemed so alive. Kira knew she couldn't share this with anyone, especially not her family or the elders. They would never understand. The truth was, Kira felt a strange connection to humans, even though she had never met one. She felt something stirred deep inside her whenever she read about them, something she had never felt before. One day, her opportunity came. Kira was on a mission to a small, remote planet. It was part of her duties as a trainee ambassador to interact with other species and ensure peace. She had visited many planets before, but this time was different. The mission was simple: deliver supplies to a human mining colony. She had never been to a human colony before, and her heart raced with excitement as the spacecraft landed. As Kira stepped off the ship and onto the dusty ground, she couldn't help but feel a mix of nervousness and curiosity. The humans here were not like the peaceful creatures she had studied. They were rough, hard-working, and focused on their tasks, yet there was something about them that drew her in. She was introduced to Theo, a human who was overseeing the colony's operations. He had a strong build and a no-nonsense attitude, but when he looked at Kira, there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes as well. He seemed just as intrigued by her as she was by him. "Welcome to our colony," Theo said, his voice deep and steady. "We don't get many visitors from your world." Kira nodded. "I'm honored to be here." Theo smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who was used to visitors. It was the kind of smile that came from someone who had seen a lot and expected nothing in return. "I've heard stories about your people," he said. "You're not like us." Kira felt a slight discomfort at his words. He was right. She wasn't like him. The Andovians had no need for the kind of raw emotion that humans carried with them. But for some reason, she didn't feel as distant from him as she thought she would. They spent the day together, walking through the colony and talking. Kira learned more about humans than she ever had before. They had families, they had struggles, and they fought for survival in a way that Kira had never understood. The more she listened to Theo, the more she realized that the humans were not as simple as her elders had told her. As the sun began to set, Kira felt a strange pull toward Theo. There was a warmth in him that made her feel safe, even though she knew nothing about him. The tension in her chest grew stronger the longer they talked. It wasn't fear, it was something else. Something new. "You don't have to stay here long," Theo said, breaking the silence. "I know your people are busy with their work, but if you ever need to talk, we're here." Kira smiled, but her heart was heavy. "Thank you, Theo. I'll remember that." As she returned to her ship, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She had heard the warnings, but for the first time, she wondered if maybe the humans weren't as dangerous as they were made out to be. There was something about them, something that made her want to know more. That night, as Kira lay in her bunk, she stared up at the ceiling, lost in thought. Her mission was over, and she was due to return to Vastra. But she didn't want to leave. Something inside her felt torn, like a thread had been pulled and was unraveling with every passing second. Kira knew that what she was feeling wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper, and it scared her. The elders had warned her never to speak with humans, but now that she had met one, she wasn't sure she could follow their rules anymore. As the stars passed by outside her window, Kira made a decision. She would go back. She would return to Vastra and carry out her duties, but she couldn't forget what she had learned. And she couldn't forget the way Theo had looked at her, the way his eyes had sparked with interest, and something more. There was something about humans, something powerful and alive, that Kira could no longer ignore. Kira sat alone in her room aboard the starship, her fingers tracing the surface of the smooth metallic table in front of her. The ship hummed quietly around her, but her mind was far from peaceful. The more she thought about Theo, the more confused she became. Their brief meeting had left her with questions, emotions, and a longing she had never felt before. She had heard all her life that humans were dangerous, unpredictable, and unworthy of contact. But Theo was different. He wasn't what the elders had warned her about. He was kind, strong, and curious. They had spent the entire day talking, and she had learned so much about him, about the humans. They lived in a way she had never imagined. There was no great peace on Earth, no grand system of order and logic like on Vastra. Instead, humans seemed to find strength in their struggles, and their bonds with each other were deeply emotional, filled with love and loyalty. Her elders had always said that such emotions were a weakness, but the way Theo spoke about his people made Kira realize that perhaps emotions were not the enemies they had been taught to be. "Maybe I am wrong," she whispered to herself. The thought made her heart race. She was on a mission, but now she had doubts about everything she had been taught. Her own world was so different from Earth. The Andovians had reached a place of great peace by eliminating their emotions. They believed that in order to maintain harmony, they had to be above petty feelings, above love, anger, or fear. To Kira, it had always seemed like the right way to live. It was the way she had been raised. But Theo's stories about his people, how they fought for what they believed in, how they sacrificed for each other, made her question everything. What if they were right? What if emotions were a strength instead of a weakness? Kira couldn't stop thinking about him. She tried to focus on her mission, to remind herself why she was there in the first place. But each time she closed her eyes, she saw Theo's face, the way he had smiled at her, the way he had listened so intently when she spoke about Vastra. She had never met anyone who made her feel so alive, so real. Despite her growing feelings, Kira knew she could not stay on the human colony forever. Her time there was limited, and she had a duty to return to Vastra. But every time she thought about leaving, something inside her resisted. Could she just walk away from this feeling? Could she just ignore the connection that was growing between them? For days, Kira kept her distance from Theo. She focused on her duties and tried not to think about the pull she felt toward him. But it was impossible. She found herself looking for ways to interact with him, even if it was only for a few moments at a time. One afternoon, as she walked through the colony, she saw him working on a set of machines. He was wearing a thick jacket, his sleeves rolled up, and his hands were covered in dirt. Despite the hard work, there was a lightness in his eyes that Kira had come to recognize as his quiet strength. He was unlike anyone she had ever met. "Hello, Kira." Theo greeted her with a smile, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're looking thoughtful today." Kira hesitated. The last time they spoke, she had been distant, trying to ignore the feelings stirring within her. But this time she couldn't. She felt an overwhelming need to talk to him. "I am confused," Kira admitted softly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, about your people." Theo tilted his head, curiosity in his gaze. "What about them?" Kira swallowed, trying to put her thoughts into words. "I've always believed that emotions, love, anger, fear, are things to be controlled. On Vastra, we don't feel such things. We are taught that emotions only lead to chaos, to destruction. But you? She paused, searching for the right words. You speak of love, of sacrifice, of loyalty. And it makes me wonder, maybe I've been wrong. Theo's expression softened. He stepped closer, wiping the dirt from his hands onto his pants. You're not wrong, Kira, he said gently. I've seen what happens when emotions are used recklessly. But I've also seen what happens when we care for each other, when we fight for each other. It's not weakness, Kira. It's what makes us human. Kira felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had never heard anything like it before, and it made her question everything she had been taught. Could emotions really be a strength? For a moment, they stood in silence, the noise of the colony around them fading into the background. Kira felt something shift between them, a quiet understanding that transcended words. I don't know if I can stay here much longer, Kira said quietly, her voice almost lost in the wind. I have duties to return to. But I don't want to leave. Theo looked at her, his eyes softening with sympathy. I don't want you to leave either, he said, his voice low. But I know you have your own life, your own responsibilities. I respect that. Kira's heart sank. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to walk away from the only person who had made her question everything she knew about herself, about the world. But she knew he was right. She had a duty to her people. The next few days were filled with quiet moments, stolen conversations, and the growing tension of their unspoken bond. Kira didn't know how much longer she could keep up the distance. Every time they spoke, she felt herself falling deeper into something she didn't fully understand. She was supposed to be the logical one, the one who followed the rules. But Theo made her question those rules. Kira knew she couldn't stay forever. She had to leave soon. But the thought of returning to Vastra without seeing Theo again filled her with dread. As she lay in her bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, Kira knew one thing for certain. Her life had already changed. The forbidden bond that had formed between her and Theo couldn't be ignored. No matter how much she tried to fight it, it was there, growing stronger with each passing day. Kira couldn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her bunk, staring up at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. For days, she had tried to ignore the feelings growing inside her, the pull she felt toward Theo. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't pretend it wasn't there. She had crossed a line by letting herself get close to him. And now, there was no turning back. The mission was supposed to be simple. Deliver supplies, gather information, and return to Vastra. But nothing about it had been simple. Every time she saw Theo, something deep inside her shifted. She began to question everything she had been taught, everything she had believed in. The next morning, Kira made a decision. She needed answers. She couldn't continue feeling torn between her duty to her people and the strange connection she had with Theo. She had to learn more about humanity, about herself, and about her people's history. She found Theo working in the colony's central hub. He was hunched over a console, his fingers moving quickly across the buttons as he monitored the colony's systems. When he saw her enter, he stood up and gave her a warm smile. Kira, hey, what's on your mind? He asked, wiping his hands on his shirt. I need to ask you something, Kira said, her voice steady but her mind filled with uncertainty. It's about my people, about the Andovians. Theo raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Sure. What's up? Kira hesitated, unsure how to begin. I've learned that humans were once considered dangerous by my people. But there's something else I've been hearing, something I didn't understand before. Theo set the tools down and stepped closer, his face showing concern. What are you talking about? Kira took a deep breath. I've been taught that the Andovians are a peaceful race because we stopped fighting each other. We learned to live without emotion, to live logically. But I've heard that humans played a role in this. Your people helped us, but the elders don't like to talk about it. They say it's dangerous. Theo looked surprised but didn't interrupt her. He simply nodded for her to continue. Why? Kira asked, her voice quieter now. Why did humans help us? Why did you help us? Theo leaned back against the console, his arms crossed. That's a heavy question, Kira, but I'll try to explain. A long time ago, humans were just like any other species, fighting, struggling to survive. But we didn't always want to be that way. We were divided, just like every other race, until we met a few others, your ancestors, the Andovians. Kira's heart raced, but the elders always say that we never needed help. They claim that we figure out peace on our own. Theo shook his head, a slight smile on his lips. That's what we were taught too. But here's the thing. They don't tell the whole story. When the Andovians first reached out to us, they were still a warlike people. But you were different. You had something that we didn't. You had the ability to see beyond conflict, to look at the bigger picture. Kira listened intently, her mind struggling to absorb the words. You mean we taught you? Theo nodded. Yes, but it wasn't just about logic. It was about seeing the strength in each other. It was about helping each other. The Andovians showed us that even the most divided species could find a way to coexist. They taught us to think beyond ourselves. Kira's thoughts spun. Everything she had believed in, everything she had been taught, was suddenly being questioned. Her people had helped humans. The Andovians were the ones who had shown them how to be peaceful. But Theo's words didn't stop there. The thing is, he continued, it wasn't just the Andovians who changed. Humans did too. We learned from you, and then we shared what we learned with others. Your people taught us the power of sacrifice, of love, things that we have forgotten. And that's why we stopped fighting. Kira felt a pang of guilt. She had always looked at her people as perfect, as the model of peace and order. But now she realized that the Andovians were not as flawless as she had been taught. They had learned from humans, just as humans had learned from them. I didn't know, Kira whispered, more to herself than to Theo. I didn't know any of this. Theo reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. I know. That's why I wanted to talk to you. The truth is, Kira, no one is perfect. Your people learned from us, and we learned from you. We all have our flaws, but we also have the power to change. Kira felt the weight of his words sink deep into her chest. She had spent her whole life believing that emotions were to be suppressed, that they were a threat to peace. But now she saw that emotions, love, anger, fear, were part of what made all species human. They were not weaknesses. They were strengths. They connected people, united them in ways logic alone could never do. I need to go back to Vastra, Kira said, her voice shaky but determined. I need to learn more about our history. I need to understand why we've been kept in the dark about this. Theo nodded, understanding. I get it, Kira. But just remember, no matter what you find, you're not alone in this. You're not the only one questioning what you've been told. And if you ever need to talk, I'm here. Kira smiled at him, grateful for his words, even though she knew their paths were now separate. The truth had been revealed to her in a way she hadn't expected. The Andovians weren't the only ones who had changed. She had changed too. And she wasn't sure what her future held, but one thing was clear. She couldn't go back to her old life without understanding what had really happened between her people and humans. As she walked away from Theo, her mind was filled with questions, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope. There was still so much to learn, and now she was determined to find the answers. Kira's return to Vastra was quiet, almost too quiet. The journey back felt long and isolating, as if the stars outside the ship were watching her, waiting for her to make a choice. Her heart was heavy with the weight of what she had learned, and her mind was filled with confusion. The knowledge she had gained from Theo, from the humans, was too much to ignore, but she wasn't sure how to share it with her people. Vastra had always been a place of peace. Emotions were suppressed, logic ruled every decision, and the elders guided them with calm wisdom. Kira had been raised to believe that this was the only way to live, without the mess of feelings, without the chaos of love, anger, or fear. But now she saw the cracks in that belief. The Andovians had not created peace on their own. They had learned it from humans, from their ability to love, to fight for each other, to make sacrifices. Her ship finally landed on Vastra, and as she stepped off the platform, the familiar hum of the city felt distant. The bright white towers and sleek buildings didn't seem as perfect as they once had. Kira felt like an outsider in her own home. Her first stop was the Hall of Elders. It was the place where all major decisions were made, where the oldest and wisest of her people gathered to share their knowledge. The hall was large and grand, with walls of shining metal and soft, glowing lights. Kira had been here many times before, but today it felt different. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face the elders and tell them everything she had learned. The eldest elder, Amara, was waiting for her at the front of the hall. Her long, silver hair shimmered in the light, and her deep blue eyes seemed to pierce into Kira's soul. Amara had always been kind to Kira, but she also held the weight of the old traditions. She was the one who had taught Kira everything about the Andovian way of life. "Welcome back, Kira," Amara said with a gentle smile. "I trust your mission went well." Kira nodded, though her heart wasn't in it. "Yes, Elder Amara. The mission was completed, but there is something I need to share with you, something I've learned that I don't fully understand." Amara's eyes narrowed slightly. "What is it, Kira? You look troubled." Kira took a deep breath and gathered her thoughts. "It's about the humans, about Earth. I've learned that the Andovians did not create peace on our own. We learned it from them. The humans showed us that emotions, love, loyalty, sacrifice, are not weaknesses. They are what brought us together." There was a heavy silence in the room as Amara's face remained unreadable. Kira could see the tension in the elder's eyes, though. She was processing what Kira had just said. "You've been talking to humans?" Amara asked, her voice calm but sharp. Kira nodded. "Yes, Elder. I met a human named Theo. He helped me understand things about humanity that I never knew. He explained how our people, learned from each other." Amara's expression remained serious. "This is troubling, Kira. The teachings of the elders have been clear for centuries. We have embraced peace because we have removed emotion from our lives. The path of logic, of reason, has led us to harmony. You are suggesting that this is not enough." Kira felt a surge of frustration. "I'm not suggesting it's not enough. I'm saying that emotions are not the enemy. They can be a strength. The humans showed us that." Amara took a slow step forward, her gaze intense. "And what do you expect us to do with this knowledge, Kira? Emotions have no place in our society. They would destroy everything we've built." Kira's heart ached as she spoke. "I don't know what we should do, but I believe we need to start looking at emotions differently. Humans learned how to coexist by embracing their feelings, by connecting with each other. If we only rely on logic, we might miss something important. We might be denying a part of ourselves that can make us stronger." Amara's eyes softened, and she placed a hand gently on Kira's shoulder. "You are young, Kira. You have seen the world through different eyes. But our way has served us for many generations. The dangers of emotion are real. We cannot afford to make the mistakes that other species have made." Kira stepped back, her voice shaking but strong. "I understand that, Elder, but we can't keep ignoring what makes us human. Emotions, love, fear, joy, are a part of us. They always will be. The humans showed me that peace is not just about logic. It's about understanding, about supporting each other through all the chaos. I can't just forget that." Amara studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now. "I will need time to think about what you've said, Kira. You have challenged a core belief of our people, but remember, we must be careful. Change is not always the answer." Kira nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had just done. She knew the elders would not change their minds easily, But she had to try. The truth had been revealed to her, and she couldn't turn away from it. The humans, with all their flaws and emotions, had something to teach them. It wasn't just about peace, it was about connection. As Kira left the Hall of Elders, she felt a sense of loss. She had spoken her truth, but it was clear that her people were not ready to hear it. The path ahead would be difficult. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she couldn't go back to the way things were. Her thoughts drifted back to Theo, to the human who had shown her the other side of peace. She didn't know if she would ever see him again, but she knew that meeting him had changed everything for her. There was so much more to learn, so much more to understand. And now, Kira had to find a way to make her people see what she had seen, to help them understand that peace wasn't just about logic, it was about heart too. Kira spent the following weeks in a haze of uncertainty. Every conversation with the elders felt like a battle she wasn't prepared for. Despite the calm, logical arguments they presented, Kira could feel the weight of what she had learned pressing against the walls of her mind. The divide between the Andovian way of life and the human approach to peace seemed impossible to bridge. Yet, something inside her refused to give up. She couldn't forget the things Theo had told her, the way humanity had risen from its struggles, using emotions as a source of strength rather than weakness. How could she return to a life where emotion was considered dangerous? How could she ignore the truth she had discovered, especially when it felt like it had changed her very core? One evening, Kira stood at the edge of the city, looking out over the sparkling lights of Vastra. The wind was cool, and the stars twinkled in the night sky above, reminding her of the vast universe she had only begun to understand. But her heart felt heavy with the knowledge that she was now caught between two worlds, her own people, who valued peace through logic, and the humans, who valued connection through emotion. She thought of Theo again. In the days since her return to Vastra, she hadn't heard from him. She wondered if he missed her, if he too was struggling with the distance between them. It seemed impossible to bridge the gap. She was an Andovian, bound to her people and their way of life. He was human, living on a planet so far away. They came from different worlds, literally and figuratively. The decision weighed on her. Should she keep trying to convince her people, or should she go back to Earth, where her heart seemed to belong? But she knew the answer. It wasn't about where she belonged. It was about what was right. The humans had helped the Andovians in ways she had never imagined. And now it was time for the Andovians to help themselves by embracing something new, something they had denied for so long. The next day, Kira decided to speak with the elders again. But this time, she wouldn't just explain. She would show them. She would demonstrate that peace wasn't about erasing emotion. It was about understanding and respecting it. The Hall of Elders was just as grand as ever when Kira walked in, but today it felt colder, as if the very walls were closing in on her. Amara was seated at the center of the hall, flanked by the other elders. Kira's heart beat faster, but she didn't let it show. "Kira, what brings you back?" Amara asked, her voice as calm as ever, though her eyes held a hint of caution. "I've come to speak again, Elder," Kira replied, her voice firm. "I need to show you why the path we followed for so long isn't the only way to peace. I've learned that peace is not about suppressing feelings. It's about understanding them, embracing them, and using them to connect." The elders exchanged looks, their faces filled with concern. But Amara nodded. "Show us then, Kira. If you believe this is so important, you must show us why it is worth changing our way of life." Kira stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve growing stronger. "I've learned from the humans. I've seen how they fight for each other, how they sacrifice for the ones they love. This isn't weakness. This is what makes them strong." The room was silent as Kira looked at each of the elders. "I'll prove it to you, but I need your help." Amara raised an eyebrow. "And what kind of help do you need?" Kira smiled faintly. "I need to bring something to Vastra that will show everyone what I mean. I need to bring a human." There was a collective gasp from the elders. Amara's eyes narrowed. You want to bring a human here? Do you realize the risk involved? The contact with humans is forbidden for a reason. Kira's voice was steady. I know the risks, but we've always been told that emotions would destroy us. I don't believe that anymore. I believe that the connection we can form with others, regardless of our differences, can bring us closer to true peace. Amara was silent for a long time, her eyes studying Kira. Finally, she spoke. If you truly believe this is the right path, Kira, then you must be prepared for the consequences. But if you are ready to face them, we will support your decision. However, you must be aware that this is not something we can take lightly. Kira nodded, her heart pounding with both fear and excitement. She had the elders' permission, but now came the hard part. She had to reach out to Theo. She had to convince him to come to Vastra, to help her show her people the truth. For the next few days, Kira worked tirelessly to prepare for the arrival of Theo. She sent messages to the human colony, explaining the situation, begging them to trust her and allow Theo to make the journey. It wasn't easy. The human leaders were hesitant, uncertain about the risks involved. But Kira's persistence paid off. They agreed to send Theo, though they made it clear that they would be watching closely. The day Theo's ship arrived was filled with anticipation and tension. The people of Vastra watched from the city's central square as the ship descended from the sky, its sleek form cutting through the air. Kira stood at the front, her heart racing as she waited for the moment when Theo would step onto her homeworld. When the ramp lowered and Theo stepped out, Kira couldn't help but smile. He looked just the same as he had when she had last seen him, though there was a hint of nervousness in his eyes. He looked around at the unfamiliar surroundings, his expression a mix of awe and caution. Kira walked toward him, her heart pounding. Theo, she said softly. He smiled when he saw her, his eyes lighting up. Kira, this place, it's beautiful. She nodded. I need you to help me show my people the truth. We can't keep pretending that emotions are something to be feared. I believe we can change, and I believe you're the one who can help us do that. Theo's expression softened as he stepped closer to her. I'll do whatever I can, Kira. I believe in you. Kira felt a surge of hope. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was on the right path. But the challenges ahead were only just beginning. The people of Vastra watched in silence as Theo walked through the Grand Plaza, surrounded by Kira and a few trusted elders. He had arrived, but the atmosphere felt thick with tension. Theo's presence was a shock to the Andovians, whose way of life had been shaped by rules and logic for centuries. The idea of introducing emotions into their society seemed dangerous to many of them. And yet, Kira had brought him here, her choice, her risk. As Theo stepped forward, he took in the strange sights of Vastra: clean streets, tall, shining buildings, and the quiet hum of technology everywhere. Everything felt so orderly, so controlled. And yet, Kira knew that order without understanding the heart was empty. The people here were missing something he could help them find. Kira looked over at him. Theo, I know this is overwhelming, but you're here for a reason. My people need to hear from you. They need to understand that emotions are not a weakness. Theo nodded, his face serious but calm. I understand. I'm ready. Kira felt a wave of gratitude and anxiety. She had to make them see what she had seen. But she wasn't sure how to begin. Her people weren't like humans, who wore their feelings on their sleeves. The Andovians were more reserved, their emotions hidden behind years of training. Would they even listen to Theo? They reached a large hall at the heart of the city, where the Council of Elders had agreed to meet. Inside, the space was as cold and sleek as the rest of Vastra, with walls made of glass and metal. The elders were already seated, their faces unreadable, but Kira could sense their unease. They weren't used to dealing with someone like Theo. Amara, the eldest of the elders, stood up as they entered. Her piercing blue eyes locked onto Kira. This is the human, then? She asked. Kira nodded. Yes, Elder. This is Theo. He is here to speak with us. Theo stepped forward, his posture relaxed, but his face was serious. Thank you for allowing me to be here, he said, his voice strong yet gentle. I know this is not an easy thing for you to accept, but I'm here because I believe what you've been taught is incomplete. The elders exchanged glances, and Kira could feel the tension in the room tighten. They weren't used to being questioned, especially not by someone from outside their world. I've heard what you've been told about peace, Theo continued. That peace comes through logic, through removing emotion. But that's not the full story. Emotion isn't something to fear. It's a part of us. It's what connects us, what drives us to fight for what's right, to protect the ones we love. Kira held her breath, watching the elders closely. Amara's gaze never left Theo, but her expression was neutral. Emotion leads to chaos, Amara said firmly. It is what has torn apart countless species, including your own. We have learned the hard way that emotions must be controlled. Theo shook his head. But isn't the desire for connection a part of who we are? The people I've met, the humans, have taught me that emotions, though sometimes difficult, are what bind us. Without them, we lose our humanity. We lose what makes us real. Kira stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. Theo is right. My people have built a society based on logic, but I've learned that we cannot ignore emotions. When I spent time with Theo, I saw how his people built relationships based on trust, love, and sacrifice. And those emotions didn't tear them apart. They brought them closer. The room fell silent. The elders exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsure how to respond. Kira knew they were caught between their long-held beliefs and the challenge he had thrown at them. Emotions are dangerous, Amara said again, though her voice had lost some of its previous strength. They can cloud judgment, lead to violence, to war. Theo nodded, but there was a gentleness in his expression. I understand that fear. I've seen it in my own people, but we've learned from our mistakes. Emotions don't have to destroy us. They can help us grow. They teach us compassion, empathy, and courage. Without them, we would have never been able to build the connections we have. Kira felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps the elders were starting to understand, but they still seemed hesitant. The fear of change was strong, and it would take more than words to convince them. Amara sighed and looked out at the group of elders. We have lived for generations without emotions running wild. This way has given us stability, peace. Why should we risk it for something unknown? Theo took a step forward, his eyes kind and understanding. Because stability without connection is empty. Peace without love is shallow. You may have built a peaceful world, but what have you sacrificed to get there? Have you truly lived, or have you merely existed? The room was quiet. For the first time, Kira could see doubt in Amara's eyes. The elder had always believed that logic was the only way, that any other path would lead to destruction. But now she was listening. Kira could feel the tide turning, just a little. Maybe the elders were starting to see the truth behind Theo's words. Amara stood up slowly, her face contemplative. Perhaps there is something to be learned here. But I need time to think about what you have said. Kira didn't want to wait. She had waited too long already, unsure of herself and unsure of her people. But she knew she couldn't rush them. They had lived by their rules for so long. Change would not come easily. Of course, Elder, Kira said, her voice soft but steady. Take all the time you need. But please, remember that emotions are not the enemy. They are part of us, and perhaps it's time we learn to accept them. Theo gave Kira a reassuring smile, and Kira felt a spark of hope light up inside her. She didn't know how long it would take for the Andovians to accept change, but for the first time since returning to Vastra, she felt like something was possible. She had given them the truth, and now it was up to them to decide what to do with it. As she walked alongside Theo out of the hall, Kira couldn't help but feel a new sense of purpose. She had started a conversation, and that was enough for now. The road ahead was still uncertain, but at least she wasn't walking it alone anymore. The days following the meeting with the elders were filled with uncertainty. Kira could feel the weight of their decision pressing down on her. The Andovians had lived by their strict rules for so long, it was hard to imagine them changing. She knew they needed time, but she also knew time was something they couldn't afford to waste. The humans had come to their aid, offering peace and support. If the Andovians turned away from that, they might never have another chance. Kira spent every waking hour working, meeting with different groups of people, trying to convince them that change was possible. It was exhausting. The deeper she got into the task, the more she realized just how much she was asking of her people. They had been taught for generations that emotions were to be controlled, kept in check, and that any sign of weakness could bring destruction. And now, Kira was asking them to embrace the very thing they feared most. Theo had remained by her side, offering support and wisdom whenever she needed it. He was a steady presence, always calm and reassuring. Despite the challenges, Kira could feel her resolve growing stronger. She had made a choice to believe in something better, and she wasn't going to back down. One evening, after another long day of discussions, Kira found herself walking alone through the quiet streets of Vastra. The stars were bright in the sky, and the cool wind brushed against her face. She was tired, both physically and emotionally. The weight of her mission had become more than she had ever anticipated, but she refused to give up. As she walked, she thought about the moment she had first met Theo. She had never imagined that one meeting would change everything, that she would be standing here now, on the brink of something so big. She thought about the humans, their strength, their passion, their ability to face fear with love. She had never fully understood them until now, until she had seen their emotions in action, shaping their world and their relationships. Kira stopped at the edge of the city, where she could see the vast expanse of the horizon stretching before her. It felt like everything was hanging in the balance. The elders were still uncertain, but they had promised to make a decision soon. She hoped they would listen, hoped they would see that change was necessary for the future. A familiar voice broke her thoughts. Kira. She turned to see Theo walking toward her, his expression soft, yet concerned. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "How are you holding up?" Kira smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just tired. I've been doing everything I can to show them that what we're asking isn't impossible, but I'm not sure they believe it." Theo came to stand beside her, looking out at the city. "I know it's not easy, but I believe in you. You've come so far already, and the Andovians aren't blind. They'll see the truth in time." Kira turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of doubt and determination. "I hope so, but what if they don't? What if we fail?" Theo reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip warm and reassuring. "You've already done more than anyone could have imagined. The hardest part was having the courage to stand up for what you believe in. The rest is out of your hands now." Kira took a deep breath, feeling a small spark of hope light within her. He was right. She had already started the change. The elders couldn't ignore what had been set into motion. The following day, the long-awaited meeting with the Council of Elders finally arrived. The atmosphere in the grand hall was heavy with anticipation. The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Kira stood at the front, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the elders seated at the far end, their faces unreadable as they prepared to deliver their decision. Amara stood first, her gaze sharp as she addressed the room. "We have listened, we have observed, and after much deliberation, we have come to a decision." Kira's breath caught in her throat. This was it. Amara continued, her voice steady. "We acknowledge the courage of Kira and the human, Theo. We understand now that emotions are not something to be feared, but something to be understood. We have been too quick to shut them out, to hide behind our rules of logic, but we now see that it is possible to balance both, logic and emotion, to create a better future for our people." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Kira's heart lifted in her chest, but she remained silent, waiting for Amara to continue. "We do not know what the future holds," Amara said, her eyes softening. "But we are willing to change. We are willing to try something new." Kira's breath caught in her throat as she looked around the room. The other elders were nodding, their faces showing signs of acceptance. It was happening. They were agreeing to change. "Today marks the beginning of a new path for the Andovians," Amara concluded. "We will learn to embrace emotion, to understand its power and its place in our society, and we will do so with the guidance of our human allies." The room fell into stunned silence, and then slowly, the others began to speak. Some of the elders voiced their support, others asked questions, but the atmosphere had shifted. The hard walls of resistance were starting to crumble, and a new path was beginning to take shape. Kira turned to Theo, her heart swelling with gratitude. He smiled at her, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it, Kira." Kira nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "We did it. Together." As the meeting continued, Kira felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had done what she came here to do. The Andovians had agreed to change. They would begin the difficult but necessary process of learning to embrace emotions. It would take time, and there would be challenges ahead, but Kira knew this was just the beginning of a new era for her people. She looked at Theo again, and for the first time since her return to Vastra, she felt truly hopeful. They had started something powerful, something that could change not just the Andovian society, but the entire galaxy. Change was never easy, but with courage and belief, anything was possible.